Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're watching. I'm Bill Goodenrath, and I'm the author of a new online resource that's just about to appear from the Corning Museum of Glass here in Corning, New York. The title is The Techniques of Renaissance Venetian-Style Glassworking. Now, for some of you glass folks, that may sound a little familiar because 3 years ago, we released an online resource, or ebook, call it what you wish, called The Techniques of Renaissance Venetian Glass. And this is the follow-up to that. This is about that great period in glassmaking in the Renaissance, roughly 1500 to about 1725, when the rich and famous and the aristocratic and the royal had Venetian glass on their table and nothing else, none other than Venetian glass. And Venice had this great monopoly on glassmaking, such that they were the sole suppliers of these people throughout Europe. And so the Venetian glass workers who made these fragile beauties, as someone called them, were required to stay in Murano, not travel, not teach anyone else the secrets. But they did gradually leave Murano, set up shop all over Europe, and many of them became wealthy and successful. And this movement of Venetian glassblowers around Europe is often called the Façon de Venise, or Venetian-Style glass movement. And that's what this book is about, as opposed to the first one, which was all about glass actually made in Venice. The book, and it is a book, we call it an online resource, contains 20 videos, and the videos begin with an illustration of an object from Austria or Spain or France, one of these countries where Venetians made glass. It shows the original object, and then it shows my reconstruction of the process that I believe was used to make the glass. And at the end, there's a picture of my finished piece, and you can judge for yourself whether I did a good job or a sort of okay job. Anyway, those are the videos. There are 20 of them. And the countries represented are as close to Venice as, well, Tuscany, Florence. They're as far away as Sweden and England, and kind of everything in between. And you see a huge variance between these things and actual Venetian glass. And that's the fun part. So I've worked on this problem of Venetian techniques and Venetian style techniques for decades. And this is the fruit of a lot of work. The videos, I think, are self-explanatory. There's a little bit of narration. I love for a glass blowing to speak for itself, mostly. And these are part of this book. And if you want to see the book as opposed to the a la carte videos, so to speak, that are on YouTube, go to the Corning Museum of Glass website and poke around and look for educational opportunities and resources. If you want a shortcut, simply go to the HTTP called renvenetianstyle.cmog.org. That'll take you right to it. And I hope you enjoy them. I had a heck of a lot of fun making them, and I think they're fun to watch, but I think they're also educational. They're a little bit addictive. When the first book came out, I had emails from friends all over the world saying, "Thanks a lot, Bill." I felt really lousy all day because I watched these videos until 3 or 4 in the morning. So control yourselves and see if you like them, and let us know what you think. At any rate, the videos are coming out right now on YouTube. The book is available on the Corning Museum of Glass website right now, and I hope you'll join us and take a look. Thanks a lot. This exceedingly complicated goblet begins with a tiny gather of glass. The gather is marvered, and a small bubble blown into the mass. A constriction is made near the blowpipe and another further from the end of the blowpipe. Excess glass broken off. Another small bit of glass is added, and this will become a mariz. The glass is flattened, made slightly conical. A shallow groove is made and a blade placed on either side of the gather. This results in the rather sharp edge, and the end is left slightly conical. Another bubble is brought over from above, lowered carefully onto the conical face of the mariz, and it's cut free of its gathering blowpipe. Decorative constrictions are made. Another constriction is made in the narrowest part of the stem. Excess glass broken free, and another mariz is made. The glass is flattened, pushed up the side of the stem somewhat, pulled outward, and this creates a very strong attachment to the stem. The foot consists of a bubble of glass lowered into a dip mold, inflated, and added to the face of the mariz. A constriction is made, and this will allow a hole to be created in the end of the bubble. After reheating, the hole is opened slightly and a tiny gather of glass added to the edge. This will minimize the tendency of the edge of the foot to become fluted during the opening process. The lowermost part of the stem has to be cooled. During the reheats, it unavoidably softens. The soffietta is used to inflate the glass. The jacks are used to dilate the hole. The punty sight is cooled, the punty is added, and this lowermost part of the stem broken free of the blowpipe. Next, decorative wings are added. A small amount of glass is flattened, touched to the upper shoulder of the stem, cut free of its gathering iron, and with very small pincers manipulated. Another small mass of glass is added, cast free of its gathering iron, and pincered. This construction is placed in an annealing oven, broken free of its punty. The annealing oven is held at a temperature of about 950 degrees Fahrenheit. The cup begins with a fairly substantial gather of glass. It's marvered, and the blowpipe is held upward slightly as air is blown into the pipe. This results in a bubble that is slightly thin at its tip. The soft glass is held downward to elongate it, and it's given a slight taper. After a substantial reheat, it's lowered into the optic or dip mold and blown hard. The cup is blown, the end is pushed inward. This results in a not spherical shape, but rather the shape of an oblate spheroid. A constriction is made near the blowpipe. Excess glass knocked free, and a Maurice is formed. A plain bubble of glass is added from above. Cut free of its blowpipe, decorative constrictions are made, and the outermost constriction will allow the breaking free of the excess glass. A tiny amount of glass is added and then flattened. This is not necessarily to be called a Maurice, it's simply a cap which closes the end of the knop. A punty is added, the neck broken, and after reheating, the cup is given its final shape. The jacks are used to dilate the hole, and the soffietta is used to reshape the bubble. The wood jacks are used at the end of the process, and this naturally creates a curving wall shape. The wood is soaked in water and tends not to leave tool marks on the glass. This too is placed on hold in the annealing oven. The flowers begin with a tiny amount of glass gathered on the end of a metal rod. A small amount of glass is added to the end, and the waffle pincers are used to create a pattern in the glass. Tiny bits are added to the perimeter. The leaf is elongated, bent, and shaped. And the finished flowers are placed in the annealing oven. The upper portion of the stem has an optic molded pattern, but here it's twisted. Air is blown into the blowpipe so that the bubble goes to the tip of the gather. It's given a slight taper, and after a reheat, lowered into the optic mold. The end is held, it's pulled outward as the pipe is twisted, and this creates the twisted pattern. A metal jig is used to create the pattern of the uppermost part of the stem. The shape is refined and the stem is straightened. A tiny amount of glass is added to the tip and flattened. A punty is added. And after a reheat, the two parts are given their shape. They're trimmed to the proper length. And the business of adding bits and pincering and shaping begins. All of the bits are added and then not cut free of the gathering iron with shears, but rather cast off. Throughout the process, the stem is constantly reheated to make sure that all parts are well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The final decorative elements are added. A tiny bit of glass is added to the tip of the stem, a flower picked up and stuck on. The second flower is added. The assembly begins with a hot punty attached to the bottom of the foot. It's straightened. A tiny bit of glass is added to the top of the stem and the uppermost portion of the stem connected. A final adjustment is made for straightness, alignment, and after a flash in the furnace, the last glue bit added, and this will be used to pick up the cup. At this point, the greatest technical challenge is keeping the foot hot as the last glue bit hardens. The vessel is lowered into the annealer, the puntee tapped lightly, and the vessel broken free. The cores of the canes are transparent glass, so the making of the cane begins with a small gather of clear glass. This is lowered into a pot of molten opaque white glass. The glass becomes opaque as it cools. And then it's thinly dipped back in the transparent glass. The tip is attached to another disc of glass, and the cane is formed. The cane is pulled to a length of about 25 feet. The cane is cut into sections about 4 inches long. And the canes are placed on a ceramic plate with grooves. They're heated to a temperature of about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A rather substantial amount of glass is gathered on the end of a blowpipe, marvered to make it perfectly round and elongated, and the canes are immediately attached to its surface. At this point, there is no bubble in the gather. The canes stick, and with reheating and marvering, the canes are softened, and using the rubber hose called the blow hose, air is blown into the blowpipe during marvering. The bubble moves outward, after reheating, the vessel body is shaped, it's inflated, the tip pulled, a constriction is made near the tip, and a constriction formed near the blowpipe. Eventually, this is where the vessel will be broken free of the blowpipe. Blowing continues. The glass is softened, the blowpipe spun to elongate the gather. The jacks are held against the side as air is blown into the blowpipe, The bottom is flattened and pushed firmly while air is blown in, and this creates the bulge. The site where the punty will be added is cooled. The punty is attached to the bottom of the vessel, the constriction held with the cold pincers, the blowpipe tapped, and the blowpipe breaks free. The end is reheated, and the hole opened to a diameter of about 1.5 inches. The entire upper portion of the vessel is reheated and the soffietta used to reshape the entire shoulder. The edge is reheated and given an acute flare. The vessel is lowered into the annealer, the metal rod or punty tapped slightly, and this breaks it free of the punty. The vessel consists of 3 parts. This is the gathering of the body. The body of the vessel is rather large, and it requires 2 full gathers of glass. This is the first gather. It's been blocked, and the bubble is blown in. The second gather is created. The block is used to perfectly shape the glass. The bubble is blown larger, and the tip is rolled back and forth on the marver to chill it. This will result in the lower portion of the vessel being a little thicker than the upper portion. Using the rubber blowhose, air is blown into the blowpipe, the bubble gets larger, and the jacks are used to create a broad constriction, and this will articulate the vessel body from the neck. Nearest the blowpipe, a tight constriction is made, and this will enable the vessel to be broken free of the blowpipe later in the process. A decorative thread is wrapped around the upper part of the body, and a grooved roulade tool is used to create a denticulate pattern. A tiny bit of glass is added and impressed with an embossing tool. This creates the raspberry print. After reheating, the vessel is held upward so that gravity creates a more oblate spheroid shape. The lowermost part of the vessel is made slightly conical, and this will make it easier to center the next element. And that is a bit of glass added and tooled to form a marise. The face of the marise is left slightly conical, and this will make it easier to center the next bit. A two-part ceramic mold, thinly lined with soot, is used to create the lion mask stem. A bubble of glass is lowered into the mold, it's closed, it's blown forcefully, and immediately lowered into place on the tip of the marise. The two stick together. Constriction is made. This creates the lower part of the stem. The excess glass is broken away, leaving a clean edge. Another bit is added, and another marise is made. A third bubble of glass is added from above. This will become the foot. It's inflated, cut free of its blowpipe, and after having been reheated, the tip is pulled and a constriction is formed. This constriction will allow a hole to be created, and the edge of the hole will become. The boot begins with a substantial gather of glass. After gathering, the glass is rolled back and forth on the marver, the cold brass table, and this elongates the glass, and it also ensures that the glass is perfectly concentric with the blowpipe. Air is blown in, and the bubble is allowed to travel about 3/4 of the length of the gather. The tip is marvered, and the combination of the thickness and the marvering will result in a bubble that is thickest at its tip. The rubber tube or blowhose is used to further inflate the glass as the gather is pulled. This results in a long cylinder. Blowing continues while pulling continues, and with the jacks, a narrow constriction is made near the blowpipe. Later in the process, this will allow the breaking of the vessel from the blowpipe. A constriction is made near the tip, and this will allow excess glass to be broken free. The outer half of the vessel is reheated, the end pushed, while air is blown into the cup. Next, the toe of the boot is made. On the end of a T-shaped metal rod, a large gather is placed, cast off, and with the blowhose, air is blown in while the pipe is twirled, and centripetal force pulls outward the tip of the glass. The edge of the sole is created by delivering a rather large gather and wrapping it around the edge. The buttons are created by delivering a tiny gather of glass to the site and pressing it with an embossing tool, and this creates a raspberry print. Throughout this process, the entire boot is frequently reheated. It must all stay over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or it will begin to crack. The spur is made at the back of the boot by adding a small amount of glass, pressing it flat, and using the shears. The puntee is attached to the bottom. The pincers held in the constriction, the blowpipe tapped, and the vessel breaks free of the blowpipe. The opening is reheated. When the glass softens, the hole is opened to a diameter of about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and it's given its final flaring shape. The entire vessel is flashed in the furnace so that when it goes in the annealer, everything is the same temperature. The vessel is lowered into the annealer, the metal rod tapped, and it breaks the vessel free. The scorpion is made of preformed rods of intensely colored opaque black glass. Glass is heated in the flame, the ends pushed together to gather or build up more glass, and this will become the body of the creature. Here the larger rod is separated from the body. And the gather is flattened between two graphite surfaces. A smaller rod is used to begin adding the legs. During the process of adding the legs, the flame is allowed to blow against the body to keep it hot. Throughout the entire process, and it is a long process, the entire construction has to be kept well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The unfortunate consequence of allowing the body of the creature to cool too much during the adding of the legs is that it can violently break. The surface of the body is heated and a knife used to carve in grooves. the next portion of the pincers are added. The exact position of the pincers are refined. After ensuring that the body is well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the second joints of the legs are added. If the second and third joints of the legs are added too soon, they melt away and lose their definition during the flashings required to keep the entire body hot. A very soft flame is used to soften the entire structure. The final positioning is given, and the process of flame annealing begins. The tail is softened and given its shape. and the entire scorpion is bathed in flame. It's essential that everything be at the same temperature and well above the annealing temperature, about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And here the final flame annealing begins. A cool yellow flame is bathed over the entire creature for about 5 minutes. When the scorpion is cool enough to handle, the excess glass is cut free of the end and the flame used to create the final shape. Even the tail must be flame annealed. This goblet is decorated with exceedingly thinly pulled white canes. The process begins with the making of the canes. Clear glass is gathered on the end of a metal rod. The cores of the canes are in fact clear glass. When the glass stiffens, it's lowered into a pot of molten, opaque white glass. As the glass cools, it transforms from transparent glass to opaque glass, the marvering rolling back and forth on the metal table further cools the glass. When this solidifies, it's thinly gathered with more clear glass. Glass is allowed to drip off back into the pot. The tip is marvered to cool the glass, and after reheating, the end of the glass is attached to another metal rod and the pulling of the cane begins. The final cane will have a very small diameter, no more than about 2.5 millimeters. This is cut into short sections after the glass cools. The canes are placed on a ceramic plate thinly covered with kiln wash to keep the soft glass from sticking to the ceramic surface. This is placed at the mouth of the furnace so that the canes get to a temperature of about Fahrenheit 950 degrees. Clear glass is gathered on the end of a metal blowpipe, marvered to make it perfectly concentric with the blowpipe and perfectly round. Air is blown in and a bubble forms. This is elongated so the bubble is about the same length as the cut white canes. The bubble is rolled over the canes, and because they're preheated and because the clear glass is hot and soft, they stick together. And after reheating and marvering and repeated reheating and marvering, the surface becomes completely smooth. This is thinly gathered over with transparent glass. Excess glass is again allowed to drip off the end of the blowpipe. The cane-covered bubble is divided into sections. This outermost bubble will be used for the stem. The nearer part will be used for the foot. Next, the cup of the goblet is made, and this begins with a substantial gather of clear glass, After marvering, the bubble is begun, and the tip is left particularly thick. To ensure that the tip stays thick, it's marvered more. The blowing of the cup begins. The glass is inflated, pulled outward. A constriction is begun near the blowpipe. And the thick glass trimmed in a way that leaves the bottom of the cup still thick. The lower portion of the vessel is shaped. A teeny bit of glass is added to the tip and tooled to become a marise. Another bit is added. This is pressed flat and after reheating, the cane-decorated bubble is lowered into place and the first element attached. Using the jacks, the glass is constricted. Another constriction is begun. The jacks are pulled inward to create the oblate spheroid shape, and the excess glass at the tip is knocked free. Another bit of glass is added at the base. This will become another marise on which the foot will sit. And after reheating the cane-decorated bubble, the uppermost part is attached, cut free of its blowpipe, and this will become the foot. A constriction is made, and at its narrowest part, the excess glass is broken away. The foot is reheated. The jacks are used to increase the diameter of the hole, and after another reheat, the soffietta is used to inflate the bubble. After a final reheat, the foot is given its final shape. A punty is added to the base, and the neck broken free of the blowpipe. The rim of the goblet is particularly thin, so a special lip thinning procedure is used. The thick glass is pulled outward, a constriction made, and the thick glass knocked away. After reheating, the tiny hole is opened to the diameter of about an inch. The upper half of the cup is reheated and inflated with the soffietta. Then, after another reheat, the soffietta is used, and after a final reheat, the cup is given its complete flared form. The finished object is flashed in the furnace, the metal punty rod tapped lightly to break it free of the goblet, and it's left in the annealing oven for slow cooling. The cores of the canes are transparent glass, so the making of the cane begins with a gather of transparent glass. After this is solidified, it's lowered into a pot of molten opaque white glass. After this hardens, it's given another thin coat of transparent glass. The three-layer gather is connected to a post and pulled. Here the pull will be about 20 feet in length. After the glass cools, the canes are cut into sections, lengths of about 5 inches. A few of these canes are placed on a grooved ceramic plate, and they're adhered to the exterior of a gather of clear glass. This will become the twisted ritortoli canes. With reheating and marvering, the white canes are pressed into the surface of the transparent glass. They're attached to a post, and as the pull takes place, both ends are twisted. The vessel begins with a rather large gather of transparent glass. It's blocked, and a bubble is blown. The bubble is elongated and allowed to cool. Its diameter is carefully monitored. And during the subsequent blowing and shaping process, the bubble is forced outward so that the tip is rather thin. The canes, preheated on a ceramic plate, are rolled up or attached to the outside of the bubble. With reheating and marvering, the canes are softened and pressed into the surface of the bubble. The tip is pricked out, a constriction is made, the excess glass is tapped off, and this leaves a hole in the tip of the gather. This bubble, decorated with the canes, will serve both to make the vessel body and to make the foot. So the bubble is divided into two sections. The part nearest the blowpipe will become the vessel. This outermost part will become the foot. It's attached to another blowpipe, The larger portion that will become the vessel is placed at the mouth of the furnace while the foot is prepared. The foot is placed on hold at the mouth of the furnace while the vessel is created. The form of the vessel is that of a tall cylinder. The glass is reheated, marvered so that the tip is pointed and cooled. The glass is inflated and pulled outward. Centripetal force is used to elongate the bubble. A constriction is formed near the blowpipe. Excess glass on the tip is trimmed, and after reheating, a combination of spinning to create centripetal force in conjunction with blowing is used to create the vessel body. The tip of the bubble is left slightly conical. The foot is reheated. The lowermost part of the vessel is given its final shape, slightly tapered. And the bubble, which becomes the foot, is reheated, marvered to shape. The vessel is propped upright, the foot reheated, and the bubble lowered into place. The constriction in the foot is broken. This leaves a hole, and after reheating, the hole is dilated to a diameter of about 1 inch, and the soffietta used to inflate the glass. The foot has a folded rim. The edge is pushed inward, and as the foot is enlarged, the edge becomes double thickness, and it's both attractive and much stronger than single thickness. The foot is given its final shape and the punty attached. The pincers are held in the constriction, the blowpipe is tapped against the right arm of the bench, and it breaks free. The glass is reheated and opened, and after more reheating, the soffietta is used to pressurize the vessel and reshape the upper half. The jacks are used to ensure that the vessel is truly cylindrical. The soffietta used to blow the thick, still hot glass thinner. To avoid torque that would distort the pattern of the canes, the punty is turned back and forth evenly. The vessel is lowered into the annealer. The punty is tapped with the pincers, leaving the vessel in the annealing oven for slow cooling. The vessel is made in 3 parts. This gather will become the long flute. The glass is marvered back and forth. Air is blown into the blowpipe, and the tip left thick and cooled by tip marvering. After a reheat, the bubble is inflated further, constriction made near the blowpipe, and the glass is rather aggressively pulled outward. The blowhose is used to gently blow air into the blowpipe as this continues. The constriction near the blowpipe is refined in shape, and after reheating, the outer half of the bubble is elongated further. The tip is retrimmed, the glass reheated, the jacks are held against the sides as air is blown into the blowpipe, and this drives air outward and makes the flute longer. A tiny amount of glass freshly gathered from the furnace is added to the tip, and this will become a marise with a slight bulge at its end. There's the bulge, and a blade on either side creates the sharp edge characteristic of the marise. A second bubble is lowered onto the tip. It's cut free of its blowpipe, and decorative constrictions are made. The tip is trimmed, and another small bit of glass, freshly gathered from the furnace, is added to the tip of the stem. This is pressed, pushed upward. A blade on either side creates a sharp edge. And a second tiny gather is added to the tip of the marise. The glass is tooled to produce a spool-shaped construction. The vessel is flashed deep in the furnace to ensure that the entire structure is well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and a third bubble is added from above. This will become the foot. The constriction is held, the tip broken away, and this leaves a hole. After reheating, the hole is dilated. The entire foot bubble is slightly softened. The soffietta used to inflate the bubble further. The lowermost part of the stem is blown to cool it. During reheating, the stem unavoidably softens slightly. The flute has a folded edge at its foot. It's a double thickness of glass that's both attractive and strong. The foot is given its final shape. The punty is added. The constriction near the blowpipe is held with the pincers, and a slight tap breaks the neck. After reheating, the hole is opened slightly. And the upper third or so of the bubble is slightly softened, and the soffietta used to carry upward the angle established on the blowpipe. The entire vessel is flashed deep in the furnace to make sure that the foot is sufficiently hot. It's lowered into the annealing oven, and with a gentle tap of the pincers on the punty, the vessel is left in the annealing oven to cool gradually. The vessel begins with a small gather of transparent glass on the end of a blowpipe. The glass is marvered, and this elongates the gather. Air is blown in, and the tip is left thick. After reheating, the rubber blowhose is used to inflate the glass as work is carried out on the end. The glass is inflated, elongated, and a carefully made constriction near the blowpipe will allow the vessel to be broken free of it later in the process. The lower half is reheated, the jacks held against the side, and blowing continues. This both shapes the lowermost part of the bubble and it blows it a little bit thinner. The bottom has to be just the right diameter for the octagonal mold to work. A substantial gather of glass is added to the tip, and as shaping takes place, air is blown forcefully into the blowpipe. You can see the bubble beginning to form at the end. A pre-made section of clear glass with a red and a white stripe down the side is attached to the end of a punty. This is thinly gathered over with clear glass. The clear glass rapidly resoftens the preformed cane. And this is added to the tip of the avolio at the bottom of the bowl. The glass is cut free of the gathering iron, reheated. Centripetal force elongates the mass. The end is flattened. It's folded upon itself, further elongated, and touched to the uppermost part. The end is held, pulled outward, and twisted. Touched opposite the first contact point, and after reheating, a loop is formed. The end is heated and pushed upward, and with manipulation, a pretzel stem is created. The glass is softened and pressed flat. Aquamarine glass is added to the side. Cast free of its gathering iron, and a waffle tool is used to create the decorative pattern. This is repeated. A tiny amount of freshly gathered glass is added to the tip, cast free, reheated, spun for centripetal force to elongate the gather, and it's manipulated to form a tiny stem element at the base of the larger part of the stem. A bubble of glass is lowered onto its tip. This will become the foot, and it's cut free of its blowpipe. A narrow constriction is made. This is held with the diamond shears. The tip is broken away, thus leaving a hole in the end of the bubble. After reheating, the hole is dilated. The soffietta is used to cool the lowermost part of the stem. During the reheating necessary to soften the foot bubble, the stem must be kept stiff and cool. This vessel has a folded edge. With more cooling of the lower part of the stem and reheating, the foot is given its final shape. Next comes the transfer to the punty. The tip of the glass on the end of the punty is blown, the constriction held with the pincers, the blowpipe tapped slightly, and the neck breaks. A thinning procedure is used to ensure that the edge of the final vessel is very thin. The soffietta is used to shape the uppermost part of the vessel. Jacks are used to give the vessel a conical form, and the entire cup is softened slightly and pushed forcefully down onto the fin mold, and this creates the octagonal pattern. The vessel is lowered into the annealer, the rod tapped, the punty breaks, leaving the vessel in the annealing oven for slow cooling. As is the case with virtually all historical glass, the cane cores are transparent. A gather of clear glass is lowered into a pot of opaque molten white glass, thinly coated, and after this hardens, another gather of clear glass is made. This is attached to a post or piece of glass on the end of another metal rod. It's elongated, and a cane of about a length of 20 feet is drawn. The blue cane consists of 4 layers: a transparent core, a layer of opaque white, excess white glass is cut away from the end, and a layer of blue. The blue glass is then very thinly coated with transparent. This is attached to a post and pulled about 20 feet long. The canes are cut to lengths of about 4 inches. And the canes are placed on a ceramic plate in patterns, and the plate is heated to a temperature of about 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. The vessel begins with a substantial gather of transparent glass. A bubble is blown in, and the gather is elongated to become cylindrical in form. Its diameter must be carefully monitored to be compatible with the length of the cane pickup. At 1400 degrees, the canes are slightly soft. They're fused and rolled up on the transparent bubble. To avoid the glass sticking to the ceramic plate, the plate has been thinly covered with kiln wash. It has to be brushed off. The glass is reheated and marvered to ensure that the canes and the clear glass stick together. At a certain point, marvering is done in place, and the torque twists the canes. A constriction is made near the tip of the gather. Shears are used to cut free the ball, and this results in a short, straight line of cane pattern. Reheating and blowing, together with marvering in place, result in the bubble getting larger, the twist getting tighter, and the bubble getting longer. The inflating against the marver also ensures that the lowermost part of the bubble will be thicker than the sides. A constriction is formed near the blowpipe. This will enable the vessel to be broken free of the blowpipe. The bubble is softened and the blowpipe spun. This creates centripetal force that elongates the bubble. The sides are touched, the bottom is flattened, air is blown in, and a rather large gather of glass is added to the bottom edge, then tooled with a grooved roulade tool, and this produces a denticulate pattern in the glass. The punty is added. The neck is broken. And the opening reheated. As the jacks are held against the glass, the punty is turned in a direction that will tighten the pattern. The soffietta is used to inflate the uppermost part of the vessel. Again, the punty is turned in the direction that will tighten the pattern. Centripetal force elongates the shoulder. The soffietta is used for a final time in preparation for creating the final rim shape. The torque from the jacks and the soffietta results in a tight twist at the top and a looser twist at the lower half. The vessel is lowered into the annealing oven, the rod tapped, it breaks free, and the vessel is left in the annealing oven for slow cooling. The foot begins with a tiny gather of clear glass. A rather thick bubble is lowered into a 12-rib optic mold. Constrictions are made. A tiny amount of freshly gathered glass is added to the tip, and a maurice is created. A maurice is made by flattening the glass, making it slightly conical, putting a blade on either side and squeezing. Another bit of glass is added to the tip. It's reheated briefly to make it perfectly symmetrical. The glass is flattened at its end, the constriction made deeper, a blade placed on either side, and the outer disc is pulled to create a narrow stem. A second bubble of glass is lowered onto the tip of the avolio. After reheating, the tip is pulled slightly and a constriction is formed. And this constriction will allow a hole to be created on the end of the bubble. The hole is opened somewhat, reheated, and the soffietta used to inflate the sides of the bubble. The vessel has a folded rim at the bottom of its foot. This is a double thickness of glass that is attractive and much stronger than a single layer. The foot is broken free of its blowpipe and placed in an annealing oven. The oven idles at a temperature of about 950 degrees. The cup begins with a substantial gather of clear glass. It's marvered. Then the blowpipe is held upward as the bubble is blown into the glass. This will ensure that the tip of the bubble is somewhat thinner than the sides. The pipe is held downward to elongate the glass. It's marvered slightly, tapered. The glass is elongated, excess glass trimmed free, and another gather of glass is added to the tip. This is pushed upward along the sides of the bubble. It's immediately pressed into the 12-rib dip mold or optic mold, and after reheating, the snipping begins to create the broken ribbing pattern. There are two sets of snipped ribs. The glass is reheated and inflated. A constriction is begun near the blowpipe. The glass is spun to elongate the bubble, and blowing and tooling continue to create a narrow constriction near the blowpipe and to give the bubble its proper shape. A tiny bit of glass is added to the tip of the bowl and a maurice created. A bubble of glass dipped into the 12-ribbed optic mold is lowered into place. A narrow constriction is immediately made near the maurice, and two more constrictions made, one decorative, and the outermost will allow the excess glass to be broken free. The cup is transferred to a punty or pontil. The narrow constriction near the blowpipe allows for easy, clean breaking. A tiny gather of glass collected on the end of a small metal rod is added. This creates a thin spiral thread. Edges of dragon stem goblets like this are exceedingly thin and require a special lip thinning procedure. The thick glass is pulled outward, a new constriction is made, and the thick glass is broken away. After reheating, the opening process begins with the dilating of the hole to a diameter of about 1 inch. After reheating, the soffietta is used to inflate the glass. And after a last reheat, the vessel is given its final shape. The core of the body of the dragon is decorated with a yellow and a red cane. These are added to a gather of clear glass. The canes are reheated and marvered in. The gather is elongated and cut into segments. To make the body of a dragon, one of these segments is attached to the end of a punty, and clear glass is thinly gathered over it. The glass is plunged into an 18-ribbed optic mold, and as the glass is elongated, the punty is twisted, and this is wrapped on a mandrel. A constriction is made near the punty, and the spiral is reheated. The coil or spiral is wrapped upon the stem, shaped. A small gather of glass is added to its base. On this, the foot will eventually sit. But for now, a punty will be attached. And it's with this that the dragon will be held as it's completed. The beak is made by adding a small gather of glass to the tip of the stem. It's divided in two, flattened, and the lips are pulled outward. After a reheat, the beak is given its final shape. The eyes are made. A teeny gather of aqua glass is used for the first eye and the second eye, and larger gathers of aqua glass are used for the wings. The glass is flattened, and the glass is pulled from both ends, and the shears are used to create the feather pattern. A comb is added to the top of the head. After ensuring that all parts of the dragon are well over 1,000 degrees, it's broken off into the annealer. The assembly begins with a hot punty to which the foot is attached. And when it's properly centered, a teeny bit of glass is added to the knop. The dragon picked up and stuck on the so-called glue bit. Another glue bit is added from above, the cup picked up and pressed on. The vessel is flashed in the furnace so that all parts are well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's lowered into the annealing oven, the punty tapped gently. It breaks free, leaving the dragon stem goblet in the annealer, ready for slow cooling. This dragon goblet is made in 3 parts. First, the cup is made, then the foot is made, the dragon is made, and finally, using teeny bits of hot glass, the parts are joined. A moderate-sized gather of glass is made on the end of a metal blowpipe. Gathering the glass is a little like gathering honey on the end of a chopstick. The glass is rolled back and forth on the metal table called the marver, and the purpose of this is to make the glass perfectly round and concentric with the blowpipe. Blowing begins, and a bubble emerges. It's essential that the tip of the bubble be kept thicker than the sides, so glass is left thick and the tip is rolled back and forth on the marver. Using pincers, a teeny point is pulled out, the gather is elongated a bit, a constriction is begun near the blowpipe, and blowing, using a rubber hose that's off view, continues while the tip is pulled outward. This gives the cup its basic shape. Excess glass on the end is trimmed away, the neck is further refined in shape, and after a brief reheat, the lower half of the cup is given its final shape. A tiny bit of hot glass, freshly gathered from the furnace, is attached to the tip of the cup, flattened with the jacks, and then tooled using the 2 blades. This is creating a fixture called a marise. A tiny amount of glass is gathered on a second blowpipe. The glass is marvered quickly. This keeps the glass very hot. A bubble is immediately blown into the glass. The bubble is tapered slightly and after a reheat, lowered into a dip mold or an optic mold to create the ribs. This is lowered onto the tip of the marise and they immediately stick together. This will form a decorative knop. Constrictions are made. At the tip, a very narrow constriction is made, and it's here that the excess glass will be broken away. In order to finish the rim, a punty or pontle is added to the tip, and the neck is broken. The punty is simply a handle with which the glassblower can reheat the open end and give it its final shape. The rims of goblets from this period are exceedingly thin, and this is a special lip thinning procedure. The excess glass is knocked off, and it's that glass that was the thickest. The hole is dilated, reheated, and the soffietta, or puffer, used to reshape the uppermost part of the glass. And with reheats and toolings, the upper third or so of the glass is given its slightly curving profile. This is broken free of the punty and placed in the annealing oven on hold. Next, the foot is made, It begins just like the knop that was attached to the cup. A small bubble is tooled to become a tiny oblate spheroid. A bit of glass is added. This is tooled to become another Maurice. Another bit of glass is added and flattened, constricted, and pulled outward. And this will form the construction often referred to as an avolio. It's the spool-like structure that joins the foot and the knop. Here a bubble has been added from above, attached to the end of the avolio, cut free of its blowpipe, and tooling begins to make a constriction. The constriction is held with the diamond shears. The pincers are used to tap off the excess, and this leaves a hole. And after reheating, this is dilated, inflated with the soffietta, and after another reheat, the foot is flared open. At the constriction nearest the blowpipe, the foot is broken free of its blowpipe. A gather of glass, freshly made from the furnace, has attached to either side a red strip of glass, a cane. As marvering continues, blowing begins to inflate the glass. After the glass hardens, it's thinly overlaid with more clear glass. This is lowered into the dip mold or optic mold and blown. The body of the dragon is hollow, and this is pulled and twisted to form a long tube. This will be the vertical portion of the dragon body. The tip is trimmed. Another gather of glass is made on the end of a metal rod. It too has red stripes. It's attached to the tip of the tube, cut free of its gathering iron, held with pincers, and then a long metal rod, a mandrel, is held, and it's around this that the coil is created. The coil is reheated and wrapped upon the vertical tube. A tiny bit of glass is added to the tip of the tube. This will be a little seat for the foot to sit on. This is attached to a punty. The tube is broken free of the blowpipe and reheated. When the glass is soft, the upper part of the tube is shaped into the neck of the dragon. A tiny bit of glass is added at the tip, cast off, and pincers are used to make a constriction, flatten the glass, make two grooves, and then at their tips, pull the lips outward and down. Tiny bits of red glass are added for the eyes. A tiny bit of hot glass is added. This will become the first wing. Using a small pair of shears, tiny cuts are made to simulate the feathers. This is repeated for the second wing. The dragon is placed on hold in the annealing oven. Next, the assembly begins. This starts with attaching the foot to a punty, and after the punty stiffens sufficiently, a tiny bit of molten glass is added to the tip of the knop. The dragon is picked up with pincers and stuck on. After another bit is added to the top of the dragon head, the cup is stuck on. The entire construction is flashed in the furnace to ensure that everything is the same temperature. And while the uppermost glue bit is still hot, a final straightening is carried out. The finished object is flashed in the furnace, and after a pause, it's placed in the annealing oven for slow cooling. With a tiny tap of the punty, it breaks free of the foot. As complicated as this goblet looks, and as many parts as there are, the entire object was built in one sitting, so to speak. A sequence of events that begins with the cup and ends with the finishing of the rim is carried out over a period in real time of only about 8 or 9 minutes. The initial gather of glass on the end of the blowpipe will be for the cup of the goblet. The glass is gently marvered on the brass table, rolled back and forth, and after it's perfectly concentric with the blowpipe, a bubble is blown into the glass. The tip is left somewhat thick, and the tip is cooled by marvering it. A tiny point is pulled out with the pincers, and using the rubber blowhose that's visible, a constriction is begun and blowing starts. The glass is inflated and then suddenly pulled outward. The constriction is refined in shape. It needs to be of narrow diameter and the shoulder needs to be tapered. The tip is tooled, the excess glass broken off, the lower half reheated, and using the jacks as a sort of a mold, the glass is inflated and it moves outward into the jacks. Next begins the process of adding bits of glass and bubbles. The first thing is a tiny bit of glass added at the tip and tooled to become a marise. This is a decorative disc, somewhat sharp at its edges and conical at its face. Another bit of glass is added, cast free, and after a brief reheat, this is flattened, the constriction tooled and pulled slightly outward. Next comes the first hollow element to be added. On the tip of a blowpipe, a tiny gather of glass is made. Marvered briefly, it's essential to keep the glass hot. A bubble is blown in. The bubble is marvered to a taper, and it's lowered into a dip mold or optic mold to give it ribs. After a constriction is made near the blowpipe, this is lowered onto the avolio, the double marise. The jacks are used to make a slight constriction near the avolio, and then a much larger, narrower constriction is made. This creates a knop. The excess glass is broken free. A tiny bit of aquamarine glass is gathered. This is added to the tip of the knop, and it's pressed flat. Another tiny bit of aquamarine glass is added, and after reheating, it's tooled to become spherical. Next begins the process of the open work. A tiny bit of glass gathered from the furnace is flattened, added to the side of the knop, cut free of the gathering iron, and then using tiny pincers is tooled to become roughly triangular in shape. This will be repeated 3 times. The tip of the second triangular element is touched to the tip of the first one, and so with the third. A tiny bit of glass is added at the tip to hold the 3 parts together. It's flattened. Decorative twists are made. Another bit of glass is added. It's on this that another hollow knop will be attached. Next, the 6 tiny raspberry prunts are made. A teeny bit of glass is added, cast free of the gathering iron, and a small tool is used to impress the soft glass to create the raspberry pattern. This is done 6 times. After carefully reheating the glass to make sure it stays well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent cracking, a third hollow element is added, yet another knop. Another Maurice construction is created, first with a bit of hot glass tooled to become flat. Another bit is added, flattened somewhat. It's on this tiny pedestal that the foot bubble will be added. And on a 4th blowpipe, a gather is made and attached to the tip of the avolio. This will become the foot. A constriction is made. The extra glass on the tip broken away, and after reheating the foot bubble, it's dilated to a diameter of about 1 inch, and after reheating, the soffietta is used to inflate the bubble. The solid element is occasionally blown to cool it. This goblet has a folded edge. After that's created, the foot is reheated and given its final profile of an exponential curve. Next comes the transfer to the punty. The punty is attached to the bottom. It will be the handle with which the goblet will be held during the completion of the rim. The neck is broken. The entire goblet flashed in the furnace. Again, it's essential to keep everything well over 1,000 degrees, or the lowermost parts will begin to crack. To create the thin rim, as we see in the original, a special procedure is used to pull extra thick glass free and with a constriction to knock it away. Here the glass is left very thin, and with reheating and tooling and the use of the soffietta, the thin rim is achieved. First, the hole is opened to a diameter of about 1 inch. After reheating, the soffietta is used to reshape the upper shoulder of the vessel. The hole is opened a little more, the soffietta used again, and the final shape is given. The jacks are used on both the inside and the outside to make sure the profile is perfectly conical. The entire vessel is carefully flashed deep in the furnace. The object placed into the annealing oven, and with a gentle tap the punty breaks free. The object is cooled over a period of about 3 or 4 hours. A small gather is made on the end of a metal blowpipe. It's marvered. The blowpipe is held upward, air blown into the blowpipe, and this will ensure that the bubble travels to the tip of the gather, thus making it somewhat thinner than the sides. The bubble is tapered, reheated, and lowered into the 12-rib dip mold or optic mold. The end is plucked out, and using the rubber blowhose, air is blown into the bubble as the tip is constricted and a constriction is formed near the blowpipe, and the cup is given its final shape. The end of the bubble is made slightly conical, and this will make centering the stem easier. The stem consists of a gather of glass lowered into the 18-rib mold, placed on the tip of the bubble, twisted, cut free, and air is blown into the blowpipe. This blows through the foot of the bubble into the solid glass, and a constriction is made near the tip of the bubble. And after reheating, this is repeated with the goal to completely close the join between the stem and the vessel body. The stem is pulled outward, a constriction made near the tip of the stem. This will allow the excess glass to be broken free. The foot will be placed directly on the tip of the stem, so it's heated and flattened. A second blowpipe is used to make a bubble, which will become the foot. The bubble needs to be opened, and this is done by forming a constriction and knocking off the excess glass. The edge of the hole will become the edge of the foot. After reheating, the jacks and the soffietta are used to make the bubble larger. During the reheating needed to soften the bubble, the stem unavoidably softens slightly and it's force cooled with air from the soffietta. The foot is given its final shallow profile and a punty added to the base. The constriction near the blowpipe is broken and the upper part of the cup reheated. The edges of these glasses are exceedingly thin, and this is accomplished with a thinning procedure whereby the thick glass is pulled outward and knocked off. The soffietta is used to inflate the upper third or so of the bubble, and this makes the final opening easier. The finished glass is lowered into the annealing oven, the rod tapped lightly, and the vessel is broken free, left in the annealing oven for slow cooling. Because one gather of glass will be used for both the cup and the stem, it has to be a substantial amount of glass. The glass is marvered to elongate the mass. A bubble is blown in, but only about a third of the way out the length of the cylinder of glass. A broad constriction is made near the outer portion. It's force cooled with air from the soffietta, and after reheating, the glass is inflated using the rubber blowhose. While the end is pulled, a constriction is begun near the blowpipe. Blowing continues, pulling continues. The neck or constriction near the blowpipe is refined in shape and made narrow. The lower portion of the bowl is cooled, and after a reheat, the stem pulled to its final shape and diameter. The excess glass on the end, the ball, is knocked free. The end of the stem is made flat, and a second bubble is lowered on to the tip of the stem. This will become the foot. Keeping the bubble centered carefully, the tip is pulled, a constriction is made, the constriction is held with the diamond shears, the tip broken free, leaving a hole. After reheating, the jacks are used to open the hole to a diameter of about an inch. And during the reheating, the stem unavoidably heats and becomes soft. The soffietta is used to force cool the lower part of the stem. The foot is given its final shallow profile. It's made straight and flat. The punty or pontal is attached to the base. The neck is broken. And the punty will be used as a handle, which will allow the reheating of the open end and the shaping with the jacks and the soffietta. First, the end is thinned. Excess glass is pulled outward, thus thinning the lip. And the excess glass is knocked free. And then with a series of reheats, tooling with the jacks, and inflating with the soffietta, the vessel is given its final conical profile. The vessel is lowered into the annealer, the punty tapped with the pincers, and the wine glass left in the annealer for slow cooling. The cores of the white canes are transparent glass. The cane making begins with a gather of clear glass thinly overlaid with opaque white glass, and after this solidifies, another gather of clear glass is taken. Here the layer is very thin. Excess glass is allowed to drip off into the furnace. The cane is pulled by attaching the white glass cane to another post of glass on the end of a different metal rod. The glass is gradually elongated and pulled to a cane of about a 20-foot length. After the cane cools, it's cut into lengths of about 4 inches. The vessel body begins with a gather of transparent glass. This is blocked to create a spherical shape and then rolled back and forth on the metal table, the marver, to produce a cylindrical shape. Its diameter is carefully monitored and altered to correspond to the length of the roll-up of canes. They've been placed on a ceramic plate heated to about 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, and they stick to the clear glass. After reheating and marvering, the canes and the clear glass become as one. Marvering continues as air is blown into the blowpipe, and the bubble gradually moves outward into the mass of clear glass. It's from this bubble that the vessel body will be formed. The canes are brought together at the tip by making a constriction. Air is blown into the pipe. The sides are held in check with the jacks. Air is blown in, a constriction is made, and after reheating the lower half of the bubble, the side angle is set, the bottom is flattened, and left slightly conical. The maurice on the bottom of the cup is formed by attaching a small gather of glass to the end, pressing it flat, making it slightly conical, and then placing a blade of the jacks on either side and squeezing. This bubble will become both the stem and the foot. After reheating, the bubble is divided into 2/3 and 1/3 segments. The upper third will become the stem. The lower 2/3 will become the foot. A hole must be created in the end of the bubble, and this is done by making a constriction, holding the constriction with the diamond shears, and knocking off the excess glass. After reheating the bubble, the hole is opened to a diameter of about 1 inch. During this reheating, necessary to soften the foot bubble, the stem unavoidably softens. It's force-cooled with air from the soffietta. The foot is reheated multiple times to allow the tooling to take place. At this point, the tip of the stem is open, so the foot is pushed back to allow a bit of glass to be added to the tip of the stem and flattened. This will serve two functions. It will seal the stem, and it will also produce a surface for the punty to rest upon. After reheating, the foot is given its final shape. Next comes the transfer to the punty. The neck is held with the pincers and the blowpipe tapped against the right arm of the bench, and the neck breaks. Excess thick glass near the rim is removed by creating a flare, pulling outward, and thus thinning the glass. The thick glass is knocked free. After reheating, the hole is opened to the diameter of about 1 inch. The soffietta is used to cool the lower portion of the cup. The upper portion inflates. The vessel has a folded rim, so the edge is pushed inward just prior to dilating the hole. And after frequent reheats, the jacks are used to create the final flaring rim. Centripetal force is used to increase the diameter of the rim. The jacks are used to create the exponential curve characteristic of this sort of glass. And after a flash, to ensure that everything is above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the vessel is lowered into the annealing oven, the punty tapped, thus breaking the vessel free. It's left in the annealer for slow cooling. The central element of the crown is hollow. A small gather is made on the end of the blowpipe. Air blown in. The gather is elongated and a series of constrictions made. The last segment will become a disc. So the last segment is inflated further, a constriction made, and this will create a hole in the end. After reheating, the hole is opened slightly, and the soffietta used to further inflate this last segment. A punty is added. The bubble is broken free of the blowpipe, and bits of glass are added and manipulated to create the crown. The waffle pincers are used. and then the fine straight pincers used to elongate and shape the two leaves. A flattened bit of glass is added, cut free of its gathering iron, and attached to the far end of the hollow element. This is repeated 6 times. Throughout the process, the entire construction must be kept well over 1,000 degrees. The denticulate pattern on the edge of the ribs is created by adding a bit of glass and then pincering it. The crown is broken free of its puntee and placed into the annealing oven. It's held at a temperature of about 950 degrees. The monogram begins with the letter C. C for Karl. Karl and Eleonora, King and Queen of Sweden in the later 17th century. The gather of glass is elongated and wrapped around the brass tool. The tips of the pincers are cooled and held in places and tapped, and this breaks the glass cleanly. The C's are placed in an annealing oven. Next, the E's are formed. All cross sections are square. The end is cut to proper length, and a constriction formed near the puntee. The next element is made square in cross section, attached, cut free of the gathering iron, and shaped. Throughout the process, all parts must be kept well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or they will crack. tiny bit of molten glass is added to the E and used to stick the E to the C. This is placed on hold while the other monogram is made. They're placed atop each other, and then both parts are picked up together on a punty. After checking for alignment problems and straightness, a tiny bit of glass is added to the top, and this will adhere the two together permanently. A little water is dripped near the punty for a clean break, and the monogram portion of the stem is placed on hold. The foot begins with a double knop. A small gather of glass is inflated, and lowered into a 12-ribbed optic mold. After the bubble is elongated, constrictions are made. The one nearest to the blowpipe will be used to break the foot free of the blowpipe eventually. Excess glass is trimmed away. A maurice is created. A bit of glass is added, flattened, made slightly conical, and another gather is added to its tip, flattened, a shallow groove is formed, and a blade on either side creates a sharp edge. Another mass of glass is added to the tip. This will become a short stem element. And it's on this disc that the foot will sit. The foot is another bubble of glass, delivered from above and carefully placed on center. The bubble is cut free of its blowpipe. The end is pulled gently. A constriction is formed. And while holding the constriction with the diamond shears, the tip is broken away with the pincers. This creates a hole. After reheating, the hole is opened somewhat. After another reheat, the soffietta is used to inflate the foot further. The foot has a folded edge. The edge is pushed inward before the final dilation of the foot takes place. During reheats to soften the bubble of the foot, the lowermost part of the stem unavoidably softens, and the soffietta is used to force cool that. Next, decorative wings are added to the foot. A bit is added, cut free of its gathering iron, elongated, and the second attachment point made, the excess glass is cast free. Then using the waffle pincers and the straight pincers, the decoration is created. The completed foot is placed on hold in the annealing oven. The cup begins with a substantial gather of glass. A bubble is blown and elongated. The tip is pulled out to make pointed and to further elongate the bubble. The excess glass is trimmed away, and after the bubble stiffens, a substantial gather of molten glass is added to its tip. This is immediately flattened, and the disc is pushed upward. While this glass is still soft, it's forcefully pressed into a 12-ribbed optic mold. The ribs are pincered to cause them to stand more proud. And every other rib is snipped with the shears. This is a pattern often called broken ribbing. After reheating the glass, air is blown in with the rubber blow hose. The thin glass inflates first. A constriction is formed near the blowpipe, and as blowing continues, the thick glass continues to inflate. Excess glass is trimmed free of the tip. And a small amount of glass is added to the tip of the bubble. This will become a maurice. Another small amount of glass is added to the tip of the maurice. Its end is gently flattened and the disc is pulled outward. Next comes the transfer to the punty. The tips of the pincers are held in the constriction, the blowpipe tapped on the right arm of the bench, and this causes a clean, even break. A tiny gather of glass on the end of a metal rod is used to create a thread. A lip thinning procedure ensures that the edge of the goblet is as thin as possible. The thick glass is pulled outward, a constriction made, and while the constriction is held with the diamond shears, the thick glass is knocked free. The opening procedure begins with reheating, dilating the hole to about an inch, and then with multiple reheats, toolings with the jacks, and inflations with the soffietta, the cup is given its final shape and diameter. The finished cup is placed on hold in the annealing oven. The assembly begins with a very hot punty to which the foot is attached. A small bit of molten glass is placed at its tip, and the monogram picked up and attached. Throughout the assembly process, it's essential to keep all parts well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Another small bit is added to the top of the monogram. The crown picked up and put in place. A final check is made for alignment before the cup is added. A tiny bit is added at the top of the crown, cut free of its gathering rod, and the cup is attached. The vessel is flashed deep within the furnace, checked for alignment, flashed again in the furnace. The completed object is lowered into the annealing oven and broken free of the punty. The lid begins with an identical crown, to which is added a rather large gather of clear glass, and this is formed to become the orb. The cross begins with a tiny gather of glass added to the tip of the orb, elongated, and then made square in cross-section using the waffle tool. The horizontal elements are added. Here a small bit of glass, cut free and made square in cross-section with the waffle tool. And this, the finial for the lid, is placed on hold in the annealing oven. The glass blowing for the lid is essentially the same as that for the cup. Only here on the punty, a flange is made with the tips of the jacks. The lower edge is opened somewhat. The diameter is carefully checked to correspond with the diameter of the cup. At this point, the wood jacks are used to further enlarge the diameter and to make it match that of the cup. Another punty is attached to the inside of the lid, the first punty broken free, and this will allow, with a glue bit, the attachment of the finial. After reheating and alignment checks, the lid is placed in the annealing oven for slow cooling. The cup begins with a rather large gather of clear glass on the end of a blowpipe. The glass is marvered back and forth on the cold metal surface. Air is blown into the blowpipe gradually, and the tip is marvered to make it pointed and to cool the glass. The rubber blowhose is attached. This will enable blowing to take place during manipulation. The end is pulled, inflation begins, and a constriction is begun near the blowpipe. As the glass is inflated, the end is pulled so that it becomes a tall, relatively narrow bubble. The tip is trimmed, the constriction near the blowpipe completed, and the excess glass is tapped free. The lower half of the bubble is softened, the jacks are held against the sides, and air is blown in to gradually round the end. The end of the bubble is made somewhat conical, and this will make it easier to center the stem. The stem begins with a gather of glass lowered into the 18-rib optic mold. It's inflated gradually and centered on the tip of the bowl. Immediately, a narrow decorative constriction is made, and further out, another constriction. These two will define the shape of the stem. The second constriction is held with the diamond shears and the excess glass broken free. To the tip of the stem is added a small gather of glass. This is reheated to ensure it being perfectly round and symmetrical. It's then flattened, a blade placed on either side, and squeezed while turning. This creates a marise. With the vessel propped upright, a third bubble is brought from above. This will become the foot. The bubble is trimmed free from its blowpipe. The uppermost part of the foot is given its shape. A constriction is formed. This will enable a hole to be created at the tip of the bubble. After reheating, the hole is opened to the diameter of about 1 inch. The soffietta is used not only to increase the diameter of the foot, but it's used to cool parts of the stem that unavoidably soften during the reheats. The foot has a folded edge. The edge is pushed inward and then upward as the foot is given its final form. This creates a double thickness that's both attractive and much stronger than a single thickness. The form is given its final shape, the edge is made flat, and a punty is attached. The punty is a handle with which the vessel can be held during the completion of the opening. The tips are held in the constriction, the blowpipe is tapped, and the neck breaks cleanly. The opening process begins. The original object has an exceedingly thin edge. To achieve that, a flare is made. The flare is pulled outward, and this pulls the glass thinner. A constriction is made. And while holding the constriction with diamond shears, the excess glass is broken away. The final opening begins with a reheat and a dilating of the hole to the diameter of about 1 inch. The soffietta is used to reshape the upper shoulder. It's opened further and immediately blown with the soffietta. And the glass is reheated, tooled, reheated, and given its final profile. And the finished vessel is placed in the annealing oven by tapping the rod gently, breaking it free, and the object cools over about an 8-hour period. This exceptionally complex tankard, the form is also known as a pot, is made in a number of steps. First, the canes have to be made, and there are various types of canes. Then the canes have to be attached to a blowpipe and the end closed so that glass blowing can begin. First, the canes are made. The first cane to be made is the simple white cane known as the Afili type. Clear glass is gathered on the end of the metal rod, rolled back and forth on the metal table called the marver. When the glass is stiff enough, it's lowered into a pot of molten opaque white glass. After this stiffens, it's given yet another coating of clear glass. The intention here is to thinly coat it with clear glass at its exterior. Excess glass is pulled off the end. And after reheating, the opposite end is attached to another metal rod. The goal here is to make a cane that's about 15 or 20 feet long with a diameter of about 7 or 8 millimeters. When the cane cools, it's cut into sections. The compound canes, known as ritortoli canes, are made by putting a few white canes, affili canes, on the outside of a large mass of clear glass, melting them in, and then pulling and twisting. Here the cane is only pulled to a length of about 10 feet, the goal being to have a diameter of about 8 or 9 millimeters. Again, when the canes cool, they're cut into sections. Next come the turquoise strips or canes. A gather of clear glass is lowered into a pot of molten opaque white glass. And after this cools enough to the point of stiffness, it's lowered into a pot of transparent aqua glass. Two affili canes are attached to opposite sides. They're preheated and quickly stick to the hot glass. After reheating and marvering to make the mass perfectly round and perfectly smooth, a spatula-like tool is used to flatten the mass. It's done so that 2 stripes are on the top surface and 2 on the bottom. This mass is then pulled into the strip. The strips are cut to length. The canes are arranged in a pattern on a ceramic surface that's been thinly coated with kiln wash. This keeps the glass from sticking when it gets hot. The canes are carefully measured and their ratio will correspond to the diameter of the post made at the end of the blowpipe. Next, the canes are reheated and fused to the point of softness. The canes are gently pressed together to make sure they're completely joined. And when they're slightly soft, they're rolled up on the end of the blowpipe. The kiln wash has to be brushed away. The roll-up is thinly lined with a bubble of clear glass. This is the sbruffo process. After reheating and marvering to make the mass smooth and round, the end is closed. The end is finally cut free with shears, leaving a short, flat array of canes. With the roll-up closed, glass blowing begins. A combination of reheating and marvering the tip allows the glass to be inflated without the bottom becoming thin. And as the bubble gets larger, the jacks are used, the two-bladed tool, are used to articulate the neck. With pulling, inflating, and jacking, the body is made and the neck is elongated. A rather narrow constriction is made about 2 inches from the end of the blowpipe. Next, the lower half is reheated. The pipe is spun so that centrifugal force will elongate the end of the bubble, and with blowing and tooling, a Roman foot is created. Constriction is made, the end flattened. A blade on either side makes the foot narrower. While holding the constriction, air is sucked out of the blowpipe and the Roman foot completed. After reheating, the vessel body is given its final shape with a little blowing and tooling. Next comes the transfer to the punty. A little bit of glass on the end of a metal rod is touched to the bottom. The neck is broken. The glass remaining on the end of the blowpipe, about 2 inches of material, will be used for the handle. The opening is reheated. On the right, the glass remaining on the end of the blowpipe is heated. The rim is given its final diameter, and the shoulder and neck shaped properly. And at just about this moment, the glass canes left on the end of the blowpipe are thoroughly molten. They're attached, cut free of the blowpipe. The second attachment point is made, and the process of casting off executed. You can see the thin cast-off thread at the top of the handle. And with reheating and tooling, the handle is given its final shape and the object gotten to a uniform temperature of about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point, it's ready to be broken free of the punty and gradually cooled or annealed to room temperature.